Okay, I think we can get started. Hi, welcome everyone. I know we have some people still coming into the room to this Zoom event on Friday afternoon. I'm Hillary Fry. I'm the executive editor of HuffPost, and I'm so happy everyone's here to join us today with our DC bureau chief, Amanda Turkle, a senior political reporter, Kevin Rovillard, and our White House correspondent, Shrish Date. And we're going to be talking about what's happened over the last 2 weeks with the conventions, what we're expecting to see as we approach the November election date we're all waiting for, with lots of anticipation, probably some anxiety, and lots of other feelings. So before we get started, I just want to run through a few instructions for folks. So if you don't mind turning on your video, please do. We'd love to see who's joining us today. And you can find that feature at the bottom left of your screen to turn on your video. And you will also have an opportunity to ask questions. We're going to have a discussion for about a half an hour, and then we'd love to take as many questions as we can from our live audience. So when that time comes, I'll remind you of your instructions, but there's a raise hand, it's a virtual hand, feature with Zoom that you can use. You do that by clicking participants at the bottom of your screen, and you'll see a panel that says on the right that says raise hand. So when you want to ask a question, you just raise your hand. I will be unmuting you and calling you up to ask a question of our reporters. And we'll get to that a little bit later in the program. If you're on a mobile device, you can also use that. You just click the More button at the bottom of your screen, of the right part of your screen, and click Raise Hand. And we will try to get to everyone's questions, but we'll also be mindful of the time. So think about it as we're going along and what you'd like to ask, and be ready. Also, we have moderators who are part of this event today. They're here to answer support questions and other things if you need some assistance. They have pink and green backgrounds, and you can chat them by selecting their name in the chat that's also at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Lastly, if you love HuffPost, and we know you do because you're here with us today, and you want to support our journalism, please consider getting a HuffPost membership. You can get access to our comments section, invites to virtual events like this one, and more. So you can just go to huffpost.com/subscribe and get more information on that and sign up for membership. So before we kick off, we are going to start by asking you all a question. You'll see a poll pop up. Please go ahead and answer. And this is a simple one. Did you watch the DNC or RNC over the last 2 weeks? So let us know. And I'm just going to hand it over to Amanda, who's going to get this conversation started.
Hey, thank you all for being here. We appreciate you doing this on a Friday afternoon. We are all pretty tired because we've been up late covering the conventions, although we expected to be in Charlotte and Milwaukee doing it, which is far more exhausting, but also, I will say, a lot more fun. I've been going to conventions since 2008. The Obama convention in in Denver was my first one. And you know, it was going to be exciting to see what they were going to be like this time, but you know, no one ended up really going, and so we were on our couch watching the convention and writing about it, just like most other people were. So I wanted to bring in. We have Shrish Date, who is our White House correspondent, and you may have seen him recently because he got quite a bit of attention for his question to President Trump, asking him if he regrets lying to the American public for the last few years. And I see a lot of you nodding, so obviously a lot of you did catch it. And so if you want Shrish to talk more about that, he can as well. And then Kevin Rovillard, who is our senior campaign reporter and is right now in Massachusetts actually covering the Ed Markey, Joe Kennedy Senate race. And so he can talk about that as well. But first I wanted to talk about the conventions, and I wanted to just kick it over to them to talk about just sort of, what are the main takeaways from the conventions? What stood out to you? What was surprising? And I'll start off with Kevin because he actually did write the takeaways for last night for HuffPost. And before I go to that though, the poll results came back, and it looks like 36% of you watched both conventions. 46% of you watched just the DNC. 3% of you watched only the RNC, and then 15% of you didn't watch either. So it seems like most of you here will have some frame of reference for what we're going to be talking about. I'm sure those of you who didn't watch either probably picked up enough in the news coverage to see it, to sort of see what's going on and know what's going on. So Kevin, let's start with you. I'd love to get your thoughts on what you observed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think this convention, sort of this 2 weeks, this convention, I guess to say, anything that's going to fundamentally shape or change the presidential race right now, but it is revealing about how each side sort of sees their challenges going forward in terms of the electorate. The Biden campaign clearly was very focused on giving people a more positive impression of Joe Biden. They did do some attacking Donald Trump, but at this point, the Biden campaign knows, or at least believes, that this race is primarily a referendum on Trump. And in that case, the voters, for the most part, think Donald Trump has failed in terms of the coronavirus, in terms of the protests and racists that have happened since the death of George Floyd. So they're fairly confident that they don't really need to do that much more attacking of Donald Trump, relatively speaking. Their main goal right now is building up Joe Biden's image so that when Trump really unleashes the full brunt of his attacks, as he sort of did at the convention, and as he almost certainly will do in the last 2 months or so of the race, Biden is able to sort of withstand those.
Sharish?
Right. Well, I've been fascinated with the Republican Party and its future since like 2007, 2008, because it was clear that their base is diminishing. I mean, demographically, it's becoming a smaller and smaller portion of the United States electorate. And in 2007, remember, we had Tom Tancredo is saying every illegal alien needs to be deported and we need a border wall. And he was the real person who started that, remember. It wasn't Donald Trump, and that existed in the party. So after Romney lost in 2012, the party came out with this idea that, okay, look, this has got to end. We need to look more like the country that we want to be a big part of, and we want to be a major party in. And so we're going to do these things. We're going to reach out to Latinos, we're going to reach out to Asians, and we're going to make ourselves more inclusive. And then here comes Donald Trump and basically sets that report on fire. And, that's what we saw last night. The president is appealing to people who are afraid of what the country already is, and even more afraid of what the country is going to be. And that's not a winning place to be for a major party. I mean, that's not going to change. He could win in November, but the demographics are going to continue the way they're going. And he has zero interest in reaching out to anybody except those who already adore him. So, that's a problem for the party. And we saw no efforts beyond maybe a good speech from Nikki Haley, one from Tim Scott, to try to be more optimistic and more inclusive. But other than that, this is the Donald Trump party now. And that's not a great place, I think, for the Republicans as a whole to be.
And who do you think the main audiences were that both of the conventions were trying to reach out to?
I mean, I think in both cases, there was definitely a focus on suburban women. Biden campaign has taken to calling the voters that they're picturing as empathy moms is the term they use, and that's why they sort of play up Joe Biden's characteristics. They think that these voters will find something admirable in Joe Biden. And then I think from the Trump campaign, you saw basically a lot of attempts to scare these people, to say, if you don't reelect Donald Trump, these scary protesters are going to come to your peaceful suburb. You saw that in the speech, which was frankly absurd, from the McCloskeys from St. Louis, which was also interesting because they kept saying that, these protesters will come to your suburbs, even though they themselves live in a city, which I thought was very strange. And also was just very strange for several reasons. Number one being that there are ultimately people who just pointed a gun at some peaceful protesters. So it's not quite clear why you would glamorize that in general. But anyway, I think clearly suburban women were the main target of this. And that was much of the Trump campaign's messaging this past week was designed at trying to convince them that the Donald Trump they've seen in the news media for the past 4 years is not the real Donald Trump. He's not as racist as you come to believe. He's not as uncaring as you come to believe. That's going to be a very, very tough sell. Ultimately, people have fixed opinions on Donald Trump at this point. How could you not considering how much he's dominated the news cycle over the years. So I think clearly suburban women, and mostly suburban white women, let's be clear too, were the target of this. Although I do think you also saw some appeal to some Hispanic voters from the RNC that they were hoping they could sort of peel off.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it seemed, oh, go ahead, Trish.
Yeah, and again, there's no need, just as a tactical, strategic thing for this next election, not really going forward, but there's no need for them to try to win over the African American vote. They're never going to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, not in the near term, nor the Latino vote. They just need to shave some margins in a few places, right? I mean, so if you either win over or depress African American turnout in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Florida, same with the Latino vote in Florida, Arizona, you could conceivably win those and live to fight another day. And I think that's where the party is kind of looking at here. But it is kind of amazing, as you pointed out, Kevin, that the Donald Trump that all these other speakers described as sounds like a wonderful guy, doesn't he? I mean, he loves everybody. He's kind. He, helps out. He was interested in people's problems. And then the real Donald Trump gets out and talks like he always talks. And so, how helpful is that?
Yeah, what did you guys think of Trump's speech last night? I thought, and it was long. It was about 70 minutes long, and it just felt flat. The Trump campaign sent out Trump's remarks to reporters beforehand, or actually while the speech had just started, I believe, and so that we had them. And I figured that they would be useless because knowing Trump, he wouldn't follow them at all, and he would just say whatever he wanted. But he actually largely stuck to the script. And that's not when sort of Trump is his most Trumpian. He likes rallies where he just goes off, says whatever he wants, talks for 2 hours. But this was very, very, scripted. It was just, this random laundry list of things that probably should have been cut down. And, I was watching Fox News after the speech, and they were even like, it was a little flat, but, it was still better than Biden and the DNC. So what did you guys think? And we'll start with you, Sharish.
Yeah, this is how Stephen Miller, who is his top immigration aide, who was Jeff Sessions' top immigration aide before that in the United States Senate, this is how he writes speeches. And he's basically been writing the same speech since the midterms. Toward the end, as soon as he starts talking about how our ancestors came across the oceans to come here, and then the pioneers moved, you're about 2.5 minutes left. And that's in the rallies, they start telling, okay, put away your computers, we're leaving now, to get back in the planes to get to the airport. So it's honestly, he's not written a new speech now in more than 2 years. And I find it puzzling because it's a bad speech. I mean, it's structurally and, for any number of ways, but Stephen Miller has got a lot of things to do, try to keep people from coming into our country, basically. And so speech writing, I don't think is at the top of his agenda right now. And no one else really challenges them. So no, it was a terrible speech. It went on forever. And you're right, Amanda, he did stick to it, absolutely. But a more honest view of Trump are the remarks that he gave. Remember, right after they finished the roll call in Charlotte and they renominated him, he took the stage a little bit and talked about Obama spying on him, and then also mail voting is fraudulent, and they're going to 80 million fake votes. That's the real Donald Trump, right? And that's what we're going to hear every single day, pretty much, from here until November, is just these wild, crazy conspiracy theories and nonsense. And, if he keeps that up, his numbers, whatever bump he got out of this, is going to go right back to where it was, and we'll be back to where we were, in July with Biden with a fair lead.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do think one thing we have to keep in mind here, that speech was way, way too long. But both of these parties know that most people aren't watching these conventions, right, and even most persuadable voters aren't watching these conventions. I think potentially part of the reason it may have had such a laundry list of things is they may have wanted to be able to cut some of parts of this speech out for whatever issue they want to make an ad about, for different types, here's the immigration portion for people we think could be persuaded by that. Here's the China portion for people we think could be persuaded by that. You also saw the DNC was trying to do some of that too, If you were a little confused by, say, the Billie Eilish performance in the middle of the DNC, the reason they really wanted that is because, well, they can take that segment of Billie Eilish, who is popular with a certain segment of young people, telling people to register to vote. They can turn that into an ad that they can then aim at those young people. So I think that's one thing we have to sort of keep in mind about Trump's speech, is that they're probably going to chop it up. That said, it was pretty meandering as a actual piece of oratory delivered last night. It was very strange, but it was also, to the extent that Trump doesn't go into the grievances that Sharice just sort of talked about Obama spying on him, et cetera. Republicans probably consider that a win if he generally stays on these issues. But the problem is that they've been talking about these issues in paid media, in ads, and trying to attack Biden on them for a while. And it really just hasn't worked. This is a very, very stable race, with Biden holding a real lead, but not an insurmountable one.
Mm-hmm. And I thought it was interesting. Trump used Biden's name 40 times in the speech, whereas Biden didn't say Trump's name once in his speech at the DNC. And I know the DNC seems like a long time ago, but I want to talk about Biden's speech a little bit too. So what Trump did, and Kevin, I think you made a good point about why Trump perhaps went through such a laundry list. That's typically actually what you get in these convention speeches. It's just this long. We have to talk about abortion. We have to talk about LGBTQ rights. We have to talk about healthcare, the economy. And Biden's speech was noticeably different. It was the shortest speech of convention speeches. And it was, I thought, very unified. And it was a refreshing break from that laundry list. And I thought it was actually one of Biden's best speeches. I think Biden actually perhaps benefited from having to do it just sort of on TV rather than speaking to a large crowd, because Biden does tend to do better sort of in one-on-one and intimate settings. He could speak to people about the grief they might be feeling if they've lost a loved one because of coronavirus, instead of having to play these big applause lines. So let's talk about, what did you guys think of Biden's speech?
I thought it was interesting. It was basically Biden was sort of saying, America needs to come back. I, and personally in my life, have come back from great tragedy. I can help America come back from this great tragedy. If you sort of had to summarize everything that was in that speech down. And I think that's a very interesting move. It's not typical. It's not, this is what I will do for you, policy point by policy point by policy point. It was much more biographical. I think that makes some sense. I think it can be easy to forget that as much as Joe Biden is known, he was vice president for 8 years. Many Americans don't really know him that well. They basically just know he was the guy who was Barack Obama's vice president. And that's been filled in a little bit as this campaign has gone on. But I think they wanted to, again, tell Biden's life story, introduce him, remind voters that he comes from sort of a working class background, remind voters of the tragedies he's overcome in his life. And I think that was very effective on that goal. The question is whether or not that's the right goal. I think there are some Democrats out there who would say he really should have focused more on maybe talking about what he would actually do for people in terms of the economy, or in terms of sort of helping fight the coronavirus and get the economy back going again. But I think it was effective at the goal the Biden campaign chose, so to speak.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think that that speech was basically a condensation of his entire campaign, which is, I'm not Donald Trump. I'm not crazy. You don't have to worry. If I'm president, you don't have to check your phones, every half hour to see what nutty stuff I've done. I'm not going to be a racist. I'm not going to insult people all the time. I'm not going to, just go off on ways to worry about, you're going to make you worry about my sanity, or whether people are going to need to 25th Amendment me, that kind of, I'm normal, and this is unacceptable what's going on right now, and we need to reset just so we can, rest for a while. And and a lot of voters bought that. That's what they're tired, man. They're exhausted of this. And Biden was offering that, and not a big fight about everything. And I think a lot of people want that. And also, it's reminded me a little bit of 2004 when Democrats said, you know what, the most important thing is that we beat George W. Bush. And we think that Howard Dean's not the person to do that. It's probably John Kerry. So we're going to go with that. And you know what? They were probably right. Kerry barely lost. I mean, 50,000 votes or whatever in Ohio, and he would have been president. So they weren't wrong.
Kerry, one thing I think Kerry gets disparaged a bit. Kerry, if you look at sort of the traditional models that people use to determine like how much an incumbent president should win by in a typical election, Kerry massively actually outperformed that and came much closer to winning than he maybe should have, considering how popular Bush was and how good the economy was at that point. But yeah, I mean, I think this is the Biden campaign felt after they won the primary very justified, I guess is the word I'm looking for. They thought their strategy had been proven right. They very much don't feel the need to alter that strategy very much, although they have altered it here and there. They've done more outreach to sort of the Bernie wing of the party than I think some people might have thought they would initially. But I do think that's partially because Joe Biden wants Bernie there and wants Elizabeth Warren there. So I think that's what they're going to go with. I think it'll be very interesting to start seeing, really after Labor Day is when we're going to start seeing the real TV ads come out. You're going to see just TV ad after TV ad after TV ad come out. It'll be interesting to see how much the Biden campaign and how much the Trump campaign, for that matter, start sort of delivering different messages to different people, or whether the Biden campaign really does stick with this one core message.
So at conventions, one thing that often happens is there's like a breakout. You know, Obama obviously is the big one. A politician who's not as well known, who gets this big national moment. Julian Castro, I believe, was another one who gained a lot of attention. Is there anyone who stood out for you as someone who had one of those moments this time at either convention?
I think at the Republican convention, I think there were two. I think it was Tim Scott, the senator from South Carolina. I thought delivered a really excellent speech. And he's someone who has been sort of maybe on the edges of, will this guy run for president? Tim Scott, is very impressive. He's, the only African-American Republican in the Senate. But he's also the kind of guy who doesn't seem to always love politics, which might make it hard for him to then run for president. I think it'll be interesting to see if he now gets a little more pressure to do that. And then the Attorney General of Kentucky, Daniel Cameron, he's someone Republicans have pointed to for a long time as a potential rising star. The Democrats didn't have as clear of one, in part because they didn't really give people the chance. The Democrats had a lot of presidential candidates, former presidential candidates that they wanted to give time to. Elizabeth Warren, Michael Bloomberg got, I would argue, a perhaps strangely prominent spot in the convention. Bernie had to give a speech. They have popular former presidents in Barack Obama and Bill Clinton and John Kerry and Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama. So there wasn't as much opportunity for those people to break out, which I think was something of a missed opportunity. I think there are people either running for office or sort of in the first year of their office who could have. I also think they chose to sort of have their keynote delivered by, I believe it was 17 different people. I think that might have been more effective if they had just chosen one of those people. For instance, maybe say Connor Lamb is a congressman from Pennsylvania who was an early Biden endorser, won a much watched special election a few years ago. If they had just had him deliver a speech, I think that might have been more effective than splitting it up among 17 people. But I think that also reflects that they didn't quite want to pick a side or just pick one person for fear of aggravating some part of the coalition.
Curious, anyone stand out for you?
Yeah, I agree. I thought that Tim Scott was very good. I was particularly interested in Nikki Haley because I'm confident that she's definitely going to run in 2024. And I'm fascinated on how she does this because I think her pull with the Donald Trump wing, which makes up, I don't know, between 25 and 40% of the Republican primary electorate, has got no use at all for Nikki Haley. And so the only way you can win in that sort of situation is if you are the one non-Trumpy candidate. And, we saw last time, we had like 17 who all but one split all that vote, and Donald Trump won the primary with maybe 33, 36% of the vote by the time that, it stopped mattering. Yeah. So, again, the challenge for the Republican Party is they, in their heads, know that someone like Nikki Haley, someone like Tim Scott needs to be the future of the party, and what is their path to get there? Now that Donald Trump has pretty much set it on fire, and it'll be non-existent in either one or in 4 years, whichever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one thing that I think has been playing out in the background of both the RNC and actually of some of the fights that have been happening in Congress over expanding unemployment benefits and extending that has been the 2024 Republican primary has started.
Right.
And I think you saw that on stage with Haley, potentially with Tim Scott, potentially, as Sharice wrote, with Donald Trump Jr. And so I think those were some people. You saw it with Tom Cotton, who is someone who ideologically seems like a good fit, and maybe with his bio seems like a good fit for the Trump wing of the party, but doesn't bring the same sort of raw gusto that Trump brings, I guess. He's not, his speech wasn't a barn burner last night.
Charisma.
Yeah, he doesn't have very much charisma. But I think also what you've started to see is a lot of Republican senators have sort of rediscovered the debt and deficit mantra that their party loved for so long, and that's part of the that's a big part of the reason why, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and other Republicans have been struggling to pass their own version of a coronavirus relief bill. It's not just that they're heartless; it's that they can't bring together the party. The people who want the aid, which tends to be sort of McConnell and some of the other senators who are up for re-election, people like Cory Gardner and Susan Collins, with these people who now don't want to vote for a big increase in the debt because they're afraid it'll get held against them in 4 years. And that's a huge chunk of people. That's Cotton. That's potentially Missouri Senator Josh Hawley, Rand Paul from Kentucky, Rick Scott and Marco Rubio from Florida. Ted Cruz potentially could run again. There's a lot of 2024, there's a lot of Republicans in the Senate who are already looking at runs in 2024. And I think that's really something to watch down the stretch of this campaign, because they're also just looking, and these people can read polls as well as we can. They see that at this moment, Trump is losing, and that could change, but they know that, Trump might not have full control of the party in 4 years.
And then I want to go to questions in a second, but Sharice, do you want to talk a little bit about Don Jr.?
Yeah, Don Jr.'s, he thinks, I believe, that he's the one to inherit, this kingdom. And let's make no mistake, they think it is a kingdom. They don't see this as a democracy. I mean, we saw that, they held a convention at the White House. I mean, that's just beyond ridiculous, just how corrupt that is. But they're okay with that. The family has been okay with like this, whatever they can get away with is their mantra. And so my dad can be president, I should be president. And there are a lot of people within the party. I go to these, I used to go to rallies back when they had them. And he is the most popular person there other than his dad. And the last two that I went to, there would be chants of 46, among Don Jr. supporters. And he would do nothing to kind of quell that and say, you know what, that's not me, guys. That's my dad. He would say, focus on what we're doing right now. Right. And thank you. So, yeah, I mean, that's a potentially a huge problem for other Republicans, because that's, like I said, between 25-40% of the vote. And if you can get a big chunk of that, that's, that goes a long way toward getting you toward the nomination.
And I'll add that Trump Jr. has also become a very sought after fundraiser for Senate Republicans, for House Republicans. The Republican base loves him. He works both very well with sort of, if you're doing a $2,300 fundraiser with wealthier donors, or if you're doing a, email for $5, Trump Jr. has appealed to both of those groups, according to Republican consultants, who really, really try to get him to sign on to a lot of their fundraising efforts.
Amanda, are you guys ready to go to questions?
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. So I want to remind everyone, you can raise your hand by clicking on participants, and you have a little virtual hand raise there. If you have any issues, please chat one of our moderators, not with your question, but if you need some assistance. I'll be unmuting people. I'll call you up by name and unmute you, and then you can ask your question. And if you would also please share where you're from, that would be great. We did have some questions submitted in advance when people registered, so we'll kick this off with one of our pre-submitted questions. Actually, we had a number of questions about voting and sort of what's going to happen with that, depending on the outcome of the election. So first, I'd love to put up our next poll, which is just asking, how do you plan to vote? Are you going to vote by mail, vote in person? And our question that is related to this, I will start with, sorry, I'm just getting this here. From Letice Mustin, who wrote in and asked, with Trump positioning the vote by mail efforts, poisoning the vote by mail efforts, should we rally people around physically going to the polls? And what plans do Democrats have in case the worst happens and it appears our election is unfair or stolen?
So I'll start with the first one, or I guess the second part of that question. Right now, both sides have dedicated really unprecedented amounts of money, tens of millions of dollars for both Democrats and Republicans, to potential lawsuits, both before, during, and after voting occurs. Part of this is spurred by changes in campaign finance law that let them raise more money for these types of legal challenges. But also, it's just there's a lot of donor interest on both sides and being prepared to fight these things out. So I do think Democrats have plans to fight this in the courts. Whether they will fight it in sort of the court of public opinion, I think they will. I don't think you're going to see something like what happened in 2000, when Democrats more or less sort of gave up on that fight. I think you'll see a very, very big fight. The true nightmare scenarios of, there being different sets of electors from one state and stuff, I don't think anyone has any idea how stuff like that could play out. And I don't think it's possible really to predict how that will play out either. To get to the first question on whether or not people should try to vote in person instead, there have been a lot of polls that have shown a big gap where Republicans sort of intend to vote in person and Democrats intend to vote by mail. I would say that right now these polls are being taken very, very far out from the election. I would imagine as we get closer to the election, that gap is going to shrink. I think you're definitely seeing more Democrats voting by mail and more Republicans voting in person. But I think most people are going to end up not making this decision ideologically, but really based on what's most convenient for them. So I think you're going to see a lot of people who right now are saying they probably intend to vote by mail, vote in person. And look, the Republican Party, for as much as Trump has trashed vote by mail and, seemed to be trying to hijack the USPS to stop it, I think you're going to see a lot of them end up voting by mail. Sharish has done a lot of reporting in Florida. He can tell you Republicans there vote by mail in really huge numbers. And I think you'll see that, in a lot of other countries or a lot of other states. Pennsylvania Republicans are pushing vote by mail. Michigan Republicans are pushing vote by mail. Most people, I think that partisan gap is going to shrink. And I think because there's been so much awareness and attention to this, I think people are going to be prepared to get their ballots in. That's not to say there's not going to be any problems, but I think this might not be the total nightmare a lot of people are predicting, but it's definitely possible.
Yeah, I think I agree. It's hard to cheat when there are 12 states potentially that are going to be deciding this. It's hard to cheat in all of them. Mm-hmm. And furthermore, mail ballots and most in-person ballots are paper ballots. It's, mm-hmm. Once you've gotten to the polls and cast a ballot one way or the other, it's going to be counted, right? Mm-hmm. And when they start arguing about whether this ballot should or should not count, ultimately those are judges. And it's very hard to try to steal an election that way in this country for that reason. So I'm not terribly worried that it's going to take all that long. And frankly, if the Biden campaign puts some effort into Florida and wins that, Florida counts nowadays relatively quickly. Mm-hmm. And, we'll know by 10 o'clock Eastern. And if Biden wins Florida, then you don't have to worry about a lot of these other places, how they're going. So, mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely the president wants to stop it. And he said why. He explained in a Fox News interview on March 30th why he did not want mail voting, because he thinks the more people vote, the more likely it is that he will lose. Simple as that. So, there's only so much he can do. He's the president. He's in control of exactly 0 ballots. So,
And I also want to say, I do think the media has a job here that I think so far the media, at least early on, has done a good job of, but I can imagine there being election night meltdowns about this. The concept of election night isn't going to exist anymore. Florida, as Sheree said, does count very quickly. But some of the other really important swing states for either the presidency or the Senate take their time counting. Arizona takes its time to count these ballots and does it via the mail. Colorado, which looks pretty safe for Biden but could have a competitive Senate race, same way. Montana is going to also have a competitive Senate race, same way. And I think it's going to be important for it to be explained that traditionally Democrats tend to gain as the vote goes on. That's just true throughout the West for various reasons. Basically, Democrats tend to turn their ballots in late, mostly because Democrats tend to be a little bit younger. Is sort of the brief summary of that. Although it would be interesting to see if that changes, considering Biden's doing fairly well with older people and senior citizens. So I think we're going to see some of that. And I think it's going to be very incumbent on us in the media to explain to people that A, this isn't going to happen quickly, and B, as it happens, it's not evidence of fraud if suddenly Democrats are doing better than they were in the first sort of round of ballots. So I think there's roles for everyone here to make sure this goes off smoothly. And I think you're going to see there's definitely going to still be some problems. There's going to be some very long lines at polling places in Georgia and Florida. Those problems haven't been solved and probably won't get solved until a new Voting Rights Act is passed. But I think the nightmare scenarios that have been floated about, I think, elections officials are doing their best to sort of get ahead of them. But that doesn't mean every problem will be solved.
And Trump is already trying to set it up. He's saying, if the results don't take days or weeks to come in, that just means that there's lots of problems and there's fraud. And like you said, I think he realizes that, the longer it takes, it could look good for Democrats. And so Trump is already setting up that if they don't come in right away, it's not going to count. And we've done a piece on HuffPost too, looking at all the things he's been saying over the past few months, already laying the groundwork for him to declare the election results illegitimate. And I wanted to share the poll results that came in about whether you plan to vote by mail or in person in November. 79% of you say you are planning to vote by mail. 14% in person, 5% say you're undecided, and then 2% say you don't plan to vote. Wow, interesting. Hopefully we can convince you to change.
Those are our international visitors, Amanda.
Oh, okay.
Don't worry. I know there's at least one on here, so we're gonna just chalk it up to that. I am going to, see, it's only one person, so you don't need to worry. It's not a lost vote. I'm going to call up Rick Powell, who has a question. Rick, I'm going to unmute you. You should get a note to unmute. There you go. And if you could tell us where you're from and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Rick. I am from Florida, so yeah, I actually used to be a legislative aide locally, so I have an interesting perspective around here. But anyways, my question for the panel. I don't really hear anybody talking about this. I don't mean here today, but in general, what do you guys think about, is Biden's campaign really prepared for the fake populism message that we're still getting from the Trump campaign? They put Charles Kirk out there, saying, I'm 26 years old, and we need to drain the swamp and get rid of lobbyists and all this, when really he's paid by 70-year-old millionaires. I don't think the DNC and I don't think they really realize that a lot of people are more informed now. And in 2016, I personally believe that Trump won because he was talking about the carried interest loophole. He talked about that on many campaign events. I understand why Biden can't talk about the carried interest loophole because I know who his donors are, but I still don't think that Biden is even trying to talk about populist messaging. So what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a point here. Biden does, he put out an ad the other day, I know Wall Street didn't build this country, the middle class did. But that's really as close as he gets to engaging in some of the full-on populism that you might have seen from Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. And look, part of that is that Democrats, part of that is this is Biden running the campaign. It's very difficult for Biden, someone who's been in Washington for nearly 5 decades, to say I'm going to drain the swamp. It's just not necessarily the most persuasive message coming from him. Another part of this is Democrats have tried throughout the past 4 years to make sort of a corruption message stick against Trump, and they just haven't been able to quite nail it for a variety of reasons. Part of that is a lot of voters still view Trump, even though he's the president, as, quote unquote, an outsider. They think he's shaking up Washington, even though, he's appointed lobbyists to cabinet positions. It's very difficult to get people to follow all of this stuff. That said, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe from some of the Democratic outside groups, you do see more of that populism down the stretch. Maybe from, Priorities USA is one of the big super PACs. They occasionally will use messaging like that. Next Gen America is a group that aims at young voters. They occasionally use some of that messaging. And look, some former Bernie aides have started super PACs. I think they have an intention to use some of those messagings if they can get that money up. But you're right, this isn't a message that Democrats are using. And it's one that you'll definitely hear people, particularly from sort of the Sanders wing of the party, worry about a little. And there's no one answer for why they haven't been able to sort of make this message stick. But Democrats have tried to use it against Trump, particularly early on in his presidency, and it just didn't quite work. And it's interesting because you do still see Democrats use it a lot against congressional Republicans. If you watch Senate ads, you'll see a lot of Democratic Senate ads are so-and-so took X amount of money from the pharmaceutical industry and then, did their bidding, which is sort of that populist messaging you're talking about. And you see a lot of that. For example, Sarah Gideon in Maine uses a lot of that messaging against Susan Collins. But you're not really seeing it at the presidential level. And I think it's just because Joe Biden isn't the perfect messenger, and it's hard to make that message stick against Trump. But I do think you're right. There are Democrats who are worried that they're not hitting that quite hard enough.
Well, I mean, I think there's a factual issue here. No, number one, the carried interest loophole it's not a lot of money. It really isn't. I mean, it's tiny. And number two, didn't Biden say he's going to increase the capital gains tax? I mean, that's like the mother lode. That has done more to cause economic inequality in this country than anything, right? Since Reagan, we have had differential rates. I mean, Reagan actually equalized them, between earned income and unearned income. And since then, it's gone the other way. So all he's got to do if he really wants to make that case is talk about, his willingness to raise taxes on people who don't work for their money. And that's a lot of it right there. As to the corruption thing, I think I disagree a little bit. I think the idea that the president is corrupt, Republicans, like hardcore Republicans, aren't going to care about it right now because they're stuck with him, right? But look, his approval ratings have never exceeded like 44%. There's a reason for this. People don't like him. He's corrupt. And so his base says, so what? We don't mind. He's breaking things. He's shaking things up. And most people say, there's something wrong with that. So, but there's only so much you can. You're not going to win over 70% of the country by pointing out that, he's taking money from taxpayers and putting it in his own pocket, which he is, by the way. And so,
and to be clear, it's really that message hasn't worked with the very small sliver of sort of people who are still persuadable here. Trump being corrupt is a major reason Democratic base voters dislike Trump, and never Trump Republicans dislike Trump. So I think that is part of that message. And I think part of what Sharish was saying also, earlier I was saying it'd be interesting to see if Biden does vary that message up. But it'll be interesting to see if Biden does sort of, in some of his advertising or some of his appearances, start going a little more populist after Labor Day, or if he really does just stick with this one core message that sort of is more focused on his biography and on empathy and on, I'm not Trump, let's, unite America and heal the soul of America, as Biden loves to say.
Do you think, the display that we saw at the RNC with the blatant use of the White House for political purposes in pretty unprecedented ways, culminating in Trump's speech at the White House last night and that fireworks display that said Trump 2020 over the Washington Monument? I know there are plenty of people, on Twitter, you saw a lot of people and a lot of ethics experts really outraged by this, saying this is, a blatant violation of the Hatch Act. This is illegal. And I think that goes into Trump's corruption and using this public office for personal gain. But do you think sort of what we saw on display at the RNC changed any persuadable voters' minds, and how, sort of voters who aren't in Washington, were they disgusted by this, or was it just like, I mean, it's politics. Like, we're fooling ourselves if we don't pretend that politics doesn't go on in the White House.
I mean, I think one thing to remember is most persuadable voters generically don't have a favorable opinion of any politician. They don't expect politicians to do good things. And so that sometimes leads them to let someone like Donald Trump off the hook, as frustrating as that might be to everyone else. But I will say, I do think it was a mistake, because if you watch and read coverage of that speech, in a lot of places, a lot of the coverage focused on the potential illegal use of the White House, which sort of overshadows the actual message Trump wants to use. If you can get into media dynamics for a minute here. I was watching ABC News, which is, a very widely watched thing, the type of thing that some of these low information voters might just have on in the background. And their segment on Thursday night before for his speech wasn't about what had been said at the RNC the day before. It was about whether or not it was appropriate for him to use the White House. And whether or not a voter cares about that, from the perspective of the RNC, you would much rather have them talking about, Nikki Haley or Melania's speech the night before and what the content of that speech was and how it attacked Joe Biden. No, it was about whether or not he did something illegal. And so I think that distraction from his core messaging was something that could be held against the RNC. Whether or not this is going to swing a voter, that's very difficult to tell. Because it's, these voters, the persuadable voters, don't tend to be paying attention this early. They're very difficult people to reach, which is why campaigns spend so much time and money trying to reach them. So yeah.
I think that a lot of this will depend on how much of an effort the Biden folks and Priorities USA, allied groups, try to make this an effort. I mean, did voters care about the fundraising scandals during the first Clinton? During the Bill Clinton administration, I think they did, and it's because the Republicans hammered them on it. Buddhist temple fundraising, remember that? I mean, were people bothered by Hillary Clinton getting paid speeches from bankers? They were, because Republicans made a big deal about it. And by the way, those things absolutely pale in comparison to what's been happening these last 3.5 years. This is just out in the open, brazen. What are you going to do about it? Corruption. Right? This has never happened before. I want to emphasize this has never happened before. And so they have a very easy case to make, I think, among those slivers of people who they decide, yeah, these people will care about this, especially when Trump went off script and then bragged, watch what I'm doing. I'm living here and they're not. I mean, What was that, right? This is just him gloating about his ability to do this. And that, I think, you'll see that in an ad, definitely.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, Kevin, I'm going to jump in because we have 4 people waiting to ask questions. And we also I just wanted to note, going back quickly to the vote by mail question we had, we've got a couple of folks on the call who, unfortunately, their mics aren't working, but they wanted to note that they're using, in Colorado and California, ballot boxes, and that these are also an important and hopefully safe. Can everyone nod? Sharish, Kevin, Amanda, ballot boxes. We're going to give them a thumbs up. They're safe. Yes. We should be using them. That those are also part of this process. And let's go ahead and fire up our last poll, and then we'll try to get to our questions. Do you believe Trump or Biden will win in November? Go ahead and vote. Let us know. And I'm going to call up Max Abrams. Max, I'm going to unmute you. And if you can tell us where you're from and ask your question.
Hi, thank you, everybody. Yes, I'm from Laguna Woods, California, and old deep red Orange County, now currently blue. Thank goodness. It took a time to do it. I want to thank all the hosts and everybody here for hosting this, and I'm surprised you guys aren't at the march in Washington, but thank you. And I want to thank Rick for his input on this. Now, Mike, I have a couple of a quick statement and question. I'm noticing everybody here looking a little down in the mouth. I mean, I understand that RNC convention was a real bummer. There's no doubt about it. But my personal feeling is I have the same type of a fear from what happened in 2016. I'm sorry to say that, I really am, but I know we have the Obama-Biden coalition that we were able to get out a lot of people to vote. This guy, Trump, has elicited so much enthusiasm, albeit all misplaced. All misplaced. Now, my concern again is that are we going to, with all the shenanigans and the other issues we got facing us, are we going to be able to get a good enough turnout and be able to defeat this guy at the ballot box? So anybody that wishes to take it, please. Thank you.
Well, 4 years ago, Donald Trump was a hypothetical, right? People said, "Oh, he's going to be terrible. He's going to be a nightmare. He's going to be corrupt. He's going to endanger our security. He's not going to be a good commander in chief," and so on. But it was all, well, how do we know that? I mean, let's give him a shot, and people did. It's not a hypothetical anymore, right? I mean, he's looked the other way on bounties being placed on the heads of American soldiers in Afghanistan. He sent love letters to the dictator of North Korea. I mean, this is no longer a what might happen. This has happened. And if people at this point say, well, I don't know if I'm going to vote, well then, at that point, you kind of get the leaders you deserve. And if you're not going to vote after 3.5 years of Donald Trump, then I don't know for what reason, how you could ever possibly be interested in voting.
And I'll make this quick just so we can get to more questions, but maybe the moderators could share a story that Ariel Edwards-Levy, our polling editor, wrote recently about sort of why polls right now show Biden with a lead, and obviously that makes a lot of people sort of uneasy of what happened in 2016, but she has an analysis of sort of why polling methodologies have changed a bit, and there's some things that are different than in 2016. Voters are deciding earlier. As Sharish mentioned, the candidates are known quantities this time. Trump is not a hypothetical, and people generally do know Joe Biden. And early voting is increasingly common, which is another reason. But there are reasons to think that, it doesn't mean that Biden's definitely going to win. The pandemic is a major question of how that will affect voting, and no one knows that, and that could increase volatility. So that would be a good piece to check out too, to see how predictive the polls will be. And we just got our poll back from the Zoom call. Do you believe Trump or Biden will win in November? 11% of you say Trump, 55% of you say Biden, and 34% of you say you are not ready to predict, which is also what I voted. Okay, so I'll throw it back to Hillary.
Thank you so much. Okay, next we have a question from Christine Dresser. Christine, I will unmute you. Are you there, Christine? Did we lose you? Oh, okay. Christine, if you're there and you want to come back, raise your hand again. I'll find you. So we have a question from, oh, here she is. Let's go. Christine, can you speak? You're unmuted. Okay, maybe her audio is not working at the moment. Okay, I'm going to go to our next question then from Martha Zorns. Martha, you can tell me if I have your name pronounced correctly. I'm going to unmute you, and please tell us where you're from and your question.
You do. Oh.
There you are.
There I am. Okay, but my video. Oh, there I am. It is Zorns. You did very well with that. I'm in Austin, Texas, so a little blue marble, as they say, in a red state, hopefully changing over time. The question has to do with how questions are asked of this president. It seems like I love the question that was presented about his lying, and of course no answer was given. But it seems like so many questions at White House presses or when they're asking him questions are such softballs or questions that he can obfuscate or not answer, and yet that's allowed, and no one can follow up, no one does follow up on the question. What's the mechanism of that? Why is that so?
Well, I can tell you that some of my colleagues do ask very tough questions. I know, the Associated Press reporter and the Reuters reporter at the press conference in Helsinki with Putin asked very, very tough questions. And, and hooray for them, and I'm proud of them. But let me tell you how this works. I mean, I've been in journalism a long time, and you start out the day with a story that you're going to write, and it's going to be about payroll taxes. And so you've got all your stuff done, and all you need now is one fresh quote from the president about payroll taxes, and you're done. You can file it. That's your day. So you go into that press briefing room, and you're going to ask about the thing that you asked, that you're going to write about. And everyone is that way, mostly. And that's why you get questions that seem like softball questions. They're, they're not difficult, but it's what that particular news entity wants that particular day. Now, sometimes people will abandon that and follow up from their colleagues' questions, and I've seen that happen too. So, it is frustrating because the president, let's be honest, he lies. He lies all the time, and that's why I asked what I did, because he's also not very knowledgeable about stuff. It doesn't help to ask him about the payroll tax because he doesn't understand the payroll tax. So what difference does it make what he says today when his administration is just going to walk it back tomorrow, or he's going to say something completely different tomorrow? But I would go a little bit easier on my colleagues because I know they are trying. And they, this is a business where there are deadlines, and you have an assignment, and if your assignment is to write about the latest wrinkle in the China deal, then that's what you're going to ask about. I mean, I get that. I mean, I used to work for AP. I know that drill. So that's the way I see it. I mean, I'm not as critical about them, I think, as some other folks are.
Okay, why don't we try, Christine, I'm going to try you one more time. Let me unmute you. Let's see. Christine, is your mic working? Nope. Okay, I'll try one more time. I see you unmuted. I don't see your video. Okay, I think we're having some technical difficulties with Christine. She was our last hand raised. We're almost at time here. I guess, and we'll see, Christine, if you well, I wish we could hear you. I'm sorry, this isn't working. So you know what, I'm just going to pull one last question from our pre-questions that were sent in before the event. This is a simple, I mean, I think we sort of got to the potential of the election and results being drawn out, but what about actually delaying the election? Samela Williams, who's on the call, but we're going to ask the question for her, is asking, can Trump actually delay the election?
No.
Yeah, no.
No. The date of the election is set in the United States Constitution. Congress would need to delay the election, vote to do that. Democrats control the House of Representatives. I suppose, there is some insane scenario where there's like a huge COVID flare up and we delay it. I really don't think even that is at all possible. So no, Trump is not going to delay the election. It's going to be happening on
Didn't even Mitch McConnell say
exactly right?
Yeah.
Even Mitch McConnell was like, we're not delaying the election.
Yeah, that's not something that's going to happen.
The other scenario that I've heard is that, well, what if they don't finish counting by whatever the deadline is to get the electors set? Yeah, well, then Nancy Pelosi becomes speaker come January. So I don't know that that's necessarily an outcome that Republicans want to pursue. So I'm not terribly worried about the mechanism of this going forward.
Awesome. Any last thoughts from Amanda, Kevin, Sharish today?
Just want to thank everyone for reading HuffPost and becoming members, and helping put my kids through college.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and like Sharish mentioned, a lot of reporters are under pressure to sort of produce a story about the payroll tax or whatever. Obviously, we are too at HuffPost, but we try to give our reporters a little bit more room. to pursue the stories that we and hopefully you find important. So that's why Sharish can go to a press briefing and not ask about the payroll tax and just ask Trump why he's such a liar. So thank you for supporting us, and please keep reading us and encourage your friends to do so as well.
Yeah, and stick around for one more second. You guys, thank you so much for teeing up my final message about membership. Please consider becoming a HuffPost member. With basic membership, which is free, you get into the HuffPost community, you can comment on stories, you can participate in our online forums, and you'll get personal event invites to events like this one. But obviously that shouldn't preclude you from financially supporting HuffPost. You can also be a paid member. And that is important to support our journalism and just show us how much you appreciate the work that Amanda, Kevin, and Sharish and our other 100+ reporters do every day. And you can find information on all of this, again, at huffpost.com/subscribe. And lastly, we would love to hear what you think about today's event. Your feedback helps us figure out what events we're going to do next, how we should tweak them, what you want out of these kinds of events. We had great, everybody was really present today. We could see that people were nodding and really feeling like they were part of that. We love to see that, but we also would love for you to take a short survey. It'll take less than 5 minutes. Lizelle, one of our moderators, is going to drop the link in the chat in the Zoom now. So if you could take a couple minutes to fill that out, we would really appreciate it. It helps us do our jobs better all the time. So thank you again for joining. This was such a pleasure. And thanks to Sharish, Kevin, and Amanda. It's great to see you guys. And I learned a lot. I'm sure our attendees did too. And I hope you guys will all join us next time. Thank you.
Thank you.